Thank you for coming. I think for me, back in November, in the Sunday Boston magazine, there was an article about how to address your child's social media addiction. Start by looking in the mirror. So I'm trying today, while Bob and Kameron are talking, not to remove my phone. I am guilty of that. I think, well, whatever. So I'm not going to do it today. But I do think it's a hot ticket item. We have our middle school resource officer with us, and he could probably tell you a lot of stories as well about the phones and addiction and so forth. But I'm going to let the experts talk a little bit today. Bob Keane is the Assistant Vice President at our World Behavioral Care. We have worked with Bob for a long, long time. We connected with them when we did things on eating disorders. And Kameron is new to me. It sounds like you've been there for a while. And you are a mental health counselor therapist at Renovated Wellness.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them. And this is being recorded. I don't tell you that it's being recorded. They're kind enough to allow this so we can reach as many people as possible. And please engage in conversation if you have any questions or concerns. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for having us, first of all. And you are so fortunate to have Dot in your community. I have to say that. I did meet Dot a long time ago, and I've had the experience of, I think, talking on a couple of things in Winchester. That's your phone. Yeah. All right. Well, there goes that test, right? And I'm not sure we're experts, right? But I think we've had exposure, both as parents actually, but also as mental health professionals who really have worked with adults, young adults and adolescents for a number of years, and have become increasingly worried actually about social media and about these devices that we all carry with us. So what we're going to do, I'll introduce myself, Cam will introduce himself. We have kind of a slideshow or PowerPoint to work from just to kind of jog our memories about things we want to make sure we say. But then we would welcome people to kind of jump in, ask questions, challenge us if you'd like. We're very open to that. Dot told you my name, but I'm Bob Keane. I'm a doctorate level social worker. I've worked in mental health in Massachusetts actually my whole career. And my career is like 40 years. It's a long time. I've worked in 6 different psychiatric hospitals across Massachusetts. So I spent a lot of time on inpatient units, which I truly love. But I also do outpatient work with CAM. And I've worked for the Department of Mental Health and for insurance companies through this long journey I've had. And I'm a parent also, so that has really, I think, changed how I think about things. It's a very powerful experience, actually, to be in mental health and to be a parent, because it really makes us much more sensitive, I think, to the experiences that you all are probably going through, and to certainly what our communities are struggling with. So, yeah, that's kind of my thing right now. We're into this social media thing, and it really came about just from treating adolescents. On an inpatient unit, and really post-pandemic. So during the pandemic, then post-pandemic. So we'll tell you a little bit about that as we get going.
And I'm Kameron Mendes. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. Everybody usually calls me Cam, so I invite everybody to do that as well. I actually met Bob about 10 years ago or so. I was fresh out of grad school, and we were was looking for a job. And I applied to the psychiatric inpatient unit. I get an interview, and there's, Dr. Bob there. And it was a great interview. We probably spent about 20 minutes together. We talked about guitars.
Yeah.
And then he offered me a job. So
you can tell a lot about a person.
Yeah. So I left that kind of questioning his, interview abilities. But here I am 10 years later. And I've really come to grow and appreciate the method to the madness. I do see clients. I've since transitioned from the inpatient units and am in private practice now at Renovated Wellness, like Dot had mentioned. And in my free time, I'm also a PhD student at Simmons University. And I have 2 kids under 5, so life is a little busy at this point. But today, we're here to talk about social media, and to give you a little sense, we have about a 45-minute presentation or so, and then...
That was 2 hours.
Oh, 2 hours. Oh.
45 minutes, all right.
Yeah. Well, we had to cut it down. You remember.
Fair enough.
So we'll kind of take you through social media, a little history on it. You have one of the articles in front of you there. We've had some other writing, so we'll go through that as well. Really some insights that we've had working with, families navigating this issue, as well as our own personal experience. So you'll get to know us a lot more as we go through and kind of weave our own stories through this talk. Here's our pictures.
Well, it is interesting just how this started. So Dot did talk about, we wrote this article for the Globe magazine, which then led to another article, which then led to an interview with NPR, and then we started to do these talks. So what we really recognize is it's just a hot button issue, and everyone is worried about it, and no one knows what to do about it, and the experts don't know what to do. And if you talk to the experts, we did a review of the American Psychological Association's statement on social media use, and frankly, I don't get it. They're not sure what to do. There are some really good things about it. There are some really terrifying things about it, but no one really quite knows what to do. And a lot of people say, well, we'll see what the research tells us. The research will take 10 years to tell us what we kind of think we know. So our message is kind of saying, you got to look around and pay attention to what's happening in front of you, and trust your gut, and trust your judgment in your families about what to do, because we don't have time to wait. This is really accelerating, and it's very important we respond now.
So if we could do a little quick survey, so kind of looking at these questions, but how many people here have one device? So if we're thinking cell phone, computer, tablet, Kindle. All right, all right, 2, 3, 3's usually 4, 5, work computers, right? I mean, it kind of gets into a lot of different avenues. And how many hours do you spend a day? If we started the bidding at, say, 3 hours, who would say they spend about 3 hours on their phone, their computers? Yeah. Anybody here work from home? All right. Okay. Quite a few. So that's it's gonna be outsized, right? But even if we're not working from home, we're oftentimes in our office, clicking away anyway, right? So we're all getting lots of screen time.
And I would add, first of all, we don't think these are bad. We actually think these devices are incredible. I think the internet is wonderful. I think my phone is a brilliant piece of science and engineering. So there are wonderful things about this. We were talking actually at a school system last week, and a woman said, I just decided on my own to stop. So for 30 days, I just turned off my device. And I play the guitar. I couldn't tune my guitar because my tuning app is on my phone, she said. And I couldn't get anywhere because I use Google, so I had to buy maps. And by the way, I couldn't take any pictures at Thanksgiving because that's on my phone too. And you got to recognize that this device that we all have, we have multiple of them, are really useful to us, right? So in a way, you got to ferret out, if you will, the wonderful uses and the necessity actually of our lives today with the phone, from some of the real risks that happen. And we actually think those are sometimes specifically with certain social media apps, and certainly with certain age groups. And I guess I would say, we could say, yes, certainly Instagram, Snapchat, those are very challenging and addictive for kids, but those will change too. There will always be that component, so you got to really kind of pay attention to what's developing as well as what we have in front of us.
Yeah, and to that point, these things are constantly changing. So when we're thinking about social media, we are talking about Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the things that you would classically think of. But this could even extend, if we look at a wider umbrella, to things like our texting, our email, right? Things that we're constantly going into our phone to check. which then leads down even more like rabbit holes. LinkedIn, YouTube, right, kind of fall under that umbrella. So when we're defining this issue, we're really thinking bigger picture.
The thing too about has time gotten away from you? So that's a phenomenon really that we all have. You can actually start doing something on your phone, and pretty quickly, an hour, maybe two, is gone, right? And you actually do lose track of time, and that's the experience that we all have when we do something we feel very, we love to do, right? If you love to read a book, you get really into your book, and pretty soon the afternoon's gone, but you've read a great book. Not so with your device, right? It can draw you in, and time passes so quickly, and at the end, you actually have very little to show for it. And that's a lot of adolescents really struggle with this. They struggle with time management anyway. So to go and do their homework and then have the device there, well, that could be a whole evening, and they haven't gotten any homework done. And that's kind of the worry we have.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else gets the updates every Sunday. If you have an iPhone, it'll say, you have spent X amount of time, and that is always shocking to me. Like, whoa, I've 3 hours a day. It's up 30-something%. Oh my goodness. So, if you don't have that turned on, turn it on and see how much screen time you're actually using every day. But it's really amazing.
So the prevalence is amazing. I always love to look at prevalence whenever I look at any kind of problem. But 97% of all Americans own a cell phone. 25 by the age of 10.7. 25% of kids by the age of 10 have a cell phone. By the age of 15 years, 99% of adolescents in this country will have a cell phone. So it is absolutely widespread, and it is starting earlier and earlier. And you can see that the way kids move with their phones is very different than actually when they were first introduced.
I think, and I've been trying to make sense of this, but I think generally what I see is right around 14 or 15, that's when parents say, okay, you can have a cell phone or have a device. Kids are going into high school, they want to keep track of them, and like how many kids are going to willingly carry around a tracker that you can see exactly where they're going, right? So this is kind of a good way, to do that, to keep a close eye on them. But the decision to give your kid a phone is a really big and powerful decision. Because you're not only talking about what this device looks like today, but what it's going to look like tomorrow, okay? And we actually don't know exactly what it's going to look like tomorrow. The next slide will go through a bit of a timeline here. But you can see on the bottom part, we're looking at really old school social media like AOL Instant Messenger. Everybody remember that, right? Where you had to be in front of your computer, probably a desktop, that took 5 minutes to turn on. And then you had to get onto AOL, right, which took another 5 minutes. And then you could go, and you had to be there responding in real time. And then if you were going to go away, you put up your BRB with some, really profound song lyrics, right? Like colors and everything like that, nice font. And then you could go away for a little bit and come back. But over time, what we're seeing is that these apps have changed. Accessibility has changed, right? So instead of a desktop, now it's on our phone. Instead of powering it up and it taking 5 minutes, we swipe up, it reads our face. We literally open our phone with our face, and we're on, right? So ease of access and portability.
So the two things that are important to me on this slide, and I just appreciate the alacrity with which this has developed. Cell phones accessing the internet was 2001, just 23 years ago. That's amazing. And then in 2020, just 4 years ago, right, we actually had the advent of smartphones, phones that could actually anticipate your needs. They could actually learn what you're tracking, that sort of thing. And when we wrote a couple of our articles, one of the things we talked about was guilt and how parents actually felt very guilty. If you talk to parents, they'll talk to you about feeling like, gee, I should have known, I should have done something earlier, I should have started slow or something like that. And we have a line, we call it a Trojan horse. These phones were Trojan horses that we welcomed into our homes because we thought they were phones, right? They were actually replacing the phones we had, the family phone or something. So the advantage now was it was wireless. You could walk around with it, and you could call people in other states through the internet. It was seen as a communication device. It is not a communication device. It is far more complicated than that. But we didn't know that. So there was no preparation. The opportunity for a family to sit down and say, in a planful way, with full knowledge about what's coming into your home, this is our plan, simply didn't exist. It was a runaway locomotive coming at us, and it is still that. So when we talk to parents, we say, you kind of just got to know you're part of this phenomena. You had no opportunity to prepare for it. We just got to figure out now what to do in response to it. So we got to, that's the pressure of it.
And to illustrate that point, if we were, that top part there, if we were to plot that on a graph, that graph would look like this, right? I mean, the advancement over the last 20 years, really the last 10 years of these devices and social media has been so fast that, and it's likely not slowing down, right? There was no time to react. All we had was hindsight to say, okay, now we're in a position where we have to act on this. We have to do something. And that's what we're hearing day in and day out from parents. Now, we talked a little bit about the health advisory that the American Psychological Association came out with last May, I believe. And that was really 10 points of what we know about social media based on the research, right? So what's the evidence backing? And you can go online and kind of look it up. It is interesting, but the thing that it really failed to do was give actionable points, things that parents can take with them and say, okay, this is what we're gonna do at home. This is how we're gonna address social media. I'd say it definitely raised the level, right, of concern. Like, okay, the evidence is showing us that this can be very harmful, but not quite sending it home. And the Surgeon General has been, a real advocate that Congress needs to do something about social media, and parents have to act because these devices and these apps can be harmful to children.
And just, probably to be very clear about the damage or the risk, we don't know how it has happened, but we do know that children's brains are constantly developing, actually, I think until they're 26 at this point. And these devices are made to stimulate the brain in certain ways. So it really does, we believe, create the phenomenon of an addiction. Just like you would see, if you went into a casino, and for some people, standing in front of a slot machine with the noises, the bells, the lights, the spinning, and the potential to win money becomes a highly addictive experience. So the belief is that these phones have been actually managed that way. They've been built that way. The social apps are that way. And given the brain development of people that are holding them, it actually can become quite addictive. If you ask an adolescent to stop using their phone for a period of time, they actually will become increasingly anxious. And we almost think of it as you would a withdrawal sort of thing. So when we talk about trying to manage it, I do think of it with that very strong word of an addiction. And how are you going to work with someone to actually decrease or contain their usage so it's not taking up their entire day?
I think there's something even more primitive about social media and these devices. So as I said, I have 2 kids under 5, but what's really amazed me is how quickly they pick up on that. You can press this glass screen and something happens. They know how to swipe, and kind of poke at things. I mean, my daughter was probably 8 months old, and she kind of knew what was going on. And that, I will say, we tried to keep all devices away, TV time, and then she goes to grandma's house, right? All bets are off. But I'm sure we were using our phone, so she picked it up from us as well. It really, for an 8-month-old to know that there's this reaction, this feedback, colors, light, sounds. It does dial into something primitive within us as humans. Now, this last piece here I think is pretty important because I think we're collectively coming to know that this is an issue. I mean, so much so that there's bipartisan legislation. And I'll repeat, bipartisan legislation, right? When do we really hear that anymore? It's called the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act, and if you read those, through that, what it really says is that for anyone under 18, they'll need parental consent to get access to social media outlets, into the apps. And they prohibit the use of algorithms for those under 18s. So what we know about the algorithm is that that is what decides what content you're going to get next, what is being fed to you through your feed. And it's interesting, a lot of the research now is looking at, if you're looking at dieting or exercise and things like that, content gets more and more and more extreme until suddenly you're looking at really harmful things. So a really important part of that legislation. And the other part, I think this part got more headlines than anything else, but for anyone under 13, they would be completely prohibited from accessing social media apps. And that number 13 isn't really pulled out of nowhere. In the health advisory, the American Psychological Association talks about really a critical point from about 10 to 14, where our need for validation, from feedback from our peers, is significantly higher. We're much more sensitive to that. We need that feedback. And what do we do on these apps? We post pictures of ourselves. We post selfies, right? And it's quantifiable. I got 100 likes on this picture and how many comments, right? I only got 50 likes on this one. What's wrong with me? Am I ugly? Do people not like me? Right? But these are the real inner workings of kids on these apps right now.
The chief executives of Meta, X, TikTok, Snap, and Discord grilled in a tense Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on the dangers of social media for children.
You have blood on your hands. You have a product. You have a product that's killing people.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg repeatedly saying his job was to build industry-leading tools and empower parents. At the back of the room, grieving families held up images of their kids they say took their own lives because of abuse on these platforms. In a rare public apology, Zuckerberg turned around and faced them.
I'm sorry for everything that you all have been through. It's terrible. No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered. And this is why we invested so much and are going to continue doing industry-leading efforts to make sure that no one has to go through the types of things that your families have had.
I think we're going to learn a lot more about that. I think it was, if you watch the whole the hearing, it was a very responsive act to really badgering by U.S. senators who really provoked him into feeling the need to do something. The decisions that were made about these devices and about the apps that go in them, I think are really driven by revenue. And that is actually the anger of the parents that are in the audience in the chambers there, who have lost people as a result of that. The feedback from these devices is so strong, as Cam mentioned, for kids, that it is devastating if it's negative or if it's attacking in any way. And at a kind of fragile point in life, more and more kids are responding, with either very significant depressions, increased anxiety, or in some cases, decisions to take their own life. So it becomes quite complicated. Well, so we told you we were working in a hospital during the pandemic. We were working together. And pandemic is a really interesting time, and we really need to study that. We'll learn the impacts of that in the years to come. But it was something, there was an incredible mental health need at that time. So the hospital's completely full, and we'd go into work every day because the hospital's completely full. We didn't know what else to do. And Cam and I were co-leading a group. So one day, actually, in group, we kind of developed this. It's very hard, by the way, to run a therapy group with adolescents and ask them to talk about their feelings. So what we do is we banter a bit, and then we ask them questions. And this one day in particular, we just said, hey, well, during the pandemic, let's just play it out, right? You're at home, or actually you're at school, you get sent home, and what happens next? You walk in your house and you go to your bedroom because that's your space. And what do you do now for the next number of months when the school is not in session or it's virtual, and you're alone essentially in your room and you don't have kids around, your friends around you? And they all said, well, we're on our phones. So we said, well, all right, so how many hours a day would you be on your phone? And I think that was kind of our jaw-dropping moment. Almost everyone in the group reported double-digit hours per day on their phone. And in a context of relative isolation, I remember one kid said 18 hours a day. And all the kids said they slept with their phones. They have them right there because they want that kind of accessibility. In case something happens, we're not sure what's going to happen, but it's that kind of need. So if that was our jaw-dropping moment, then we started to realize that, wow, well, not only can we actually get these kids to talk about this, which was a good thing, but it's a big thing. And the amount of time was staggering.
And this number, these numbers were appearing time and time again. So we're in this group every day. We have new cohorts of kids coming in, and we ask this very same question, and consistently over 10 hours a day. In the beginning of the pandemic, right, we were all figuring things out. We were thinking, okay, this might be a couple of weeks, which then turned into a few months, which then turned into, a couple of years. But the online time was skewed, and for good reason, right? Kids were isolated from their friends. They wanted connection. They were seeking that.
It certainly became their lifeline, and they knew that they had a problem, that it was too much. What was really kind of staggering to us is that they said they need help with it. They said they couldn't cut back by themselves. They needed help. They needed either us to set rules for them, they needed their parents to set rules, or even the government to do that. Because left to their own devices, they are going to be on their phones. And it was that much of a draw. It got them in.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the interesting, and I think this was one of your groups, Bob, but on the unit, if we have COVID on the unit, we have to isolate, right? And kids said that they would rather be isolated in their room with their tech, access to social media, than out in the community with peers without tech. And as the inpatient unit is designed, you have to earn tech time at the end of the day, right? So you go to all of the groups, you are respectful to everyone, you get some tech time. But during the pandemic, if we have kids in their room isolated for 5 days at a time, we feel so badly for them, we give them their phone, right? We give them that lifeline, which under those circumstances, it can serve.
Yeah, no, I mean, it had an irony to it. So, Cam's right. We're trying to manage COVID. There'd be an outbreak. If you're positive, you would actually have to be isolated 5 days in your room. That was the deal. And we did give them their tech, and that's what they wanted. They would rather that than to be without their tech and with other people. And that to me was really that's a big warning sign, And I actually think we still struggle with that. The glue that keeps us together as people was really damaged during COVID, and in many aspects was replaced by an artificial connection online. And I think we're still struggling with that. As adults, I think in communities we struggle with that, and these kids definitely struggle with it.
Yeah, and that glue, social media doesn't really connect in the same way as being with people, does. And I think we're coming to know that more and more as we come further out of the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. So, well, again, we're in group, right? So we have to tell these kids something to engage them. So we say we're going to write a new theory, and now they're mildly interested. They want to know what that is. So we say, actually, the goal is we're going to write this theory up, and someone's going to send us to a conference in San Diego in February, when it's supposed to be really warm there, and that was going to be great. So now they think we're crazy. And we say, well, and the theory is this, that your use of your device is changing how you think of happiness. In fact, it distorts it. And we really painted it out for them. You know, you're on your phones all this time. You're interacting with people who are your peers, and they're always happy. But that's not real. You know that. And actually, I think what is happening to you as you're doing this, you're watching this on your phone, is you're seeing everyone else happy, and at some point it occurs to you that you're not. In fact, you're definitely not as happy as everyone who is exuberant on the social media thing, you know? And it is that actually is the damage, because when you realize that you're not happy and everyone else is, the conclusion for an adolescent is there's something really wrong with me. And that's when depression and anxiety really quickly follow. So our theory then was, okay, so you now have a distorted sense of happiness. So scrub happiness. Happiness can't be the goal. And the goal is this thing called contentedness. And they didn't know what that was, so we had to explain. So contentedness is just a sense that, you know, everything's okay. And you actually have feelings of contentedness every day. So if you're just, you know, if you're sitting at home on a sofa after dinner and the house is comfortable and everyone's kind of getting along, that's a moment of contentedness. Things are okay. They're not exuberant, they're okay. And you have to look for moments of contentedness in your day. And they actually got it. They really thought that was a great way of thinking about it. You know, we've been sold this idea that we're pursuing happiness. But really what we need to do is pursue contentedness. And that just happens from moments of awareness that are every day, that things are okay in our lives.
The pursuit of happiness is written into our Constitution. This is an idea that goes back centuries, right? And with social media, like Bob is saying, that goal of happiness has gotten further and further out of reach as we expect happiness to be something more and more and more. So contentedness is a lot easier to get, especially on a day-to-day basis, right? If you finish your homework, that satisfaction that you get the rest of the night, you can hang out, you don't have to worry about that. You know, for us, if we leave work a little early on a Friday, you get an early start to our weekend, that's a source of contentment, right? So instead of reaching for happiness, which is probably, I mean, we can get there, but not on a day-to-day basis, definitely not multiple times a day, maybe once a week, right? Might be an okay expectation. But if we focus on contentment through our day-to-day, then maybe, just maybe, we might start to feel happy a little bit more.
So let me talk about boredom for a moment. So this goes back many years. I told you I worked at all these psychiatric hospitals, but I was working in a hospital, and we have what's called community meeting. And we sit in a big circle. It's all the staff and all the patients every morning. And we have to go around, we have to say how we're feeling. We have to say our name and how we're feeling. It's not that hard, but for these kids, it was really hard to do that. And we were doing it, and I remember there was this beautiful little girl there named Trish, and it gets to her, and she goes, "My name's Trish, and I'm feeling bored." And one of the staff people said, "That's not a feeling." Right? Boredom, that's not a feeling, But we had this psychologist with us that practically jumps out of his seat. He was a very expressive guy, and he goes, "It is a feeling. It's a very important feeling, And I think he shook everyone in the room, so Trish felt better. But I was intrigued, and honestly, I've thought about that for years. Is boredom a feeling? And I've kind of come to the point that yes, boredom's a feeling. And the psychologist was right. It's a very important feeling, right? And I look back in my own life, and it is only through boredom, honestly, that I pushed myself to do things. You know, if I was bored and a group of friends were going to do something, I might not have really liked those kids that much, but I was bored, so I did it because it was better than being bored. And I developed some positive relationships that way. And the same with interests, you know, all my interests. I started that because I was looking for things that were a cure to boredom. But these devices are a cure to boredom. And that's the danger, right? If you really think what I'm saying is true, that boredom is a very important feeling, devices take it away. Any moment, and we all do it too, any moment you have a pause, you take out your device and you are instantaneously occupied. And you can do it for 3 hours and put it down for 10 minutes and pick it up, and there's all new information. You can do it for another 3 hours. It's really amazing. Boredom is no longer a problem for anyone. And that's the problem. I was telling, well, I do play the guitar, and I was telling Dot earlier that when I had a birthday, my wife gave me guitar lessons, and I've been going once a month to this really great guitar teacher, and I love it, you know, because I'm so fascinated with the guitar. And I was talking to him last time I was there, and he says, yeah, most kids don't want to learn the guitar anymore. And I said, no, I think you're wrong. They all want to. They don't know how to, you know, and they're looking for the solution on YouTube, the snippets of very quick information, rather than the methodical study of an instrument. And it's really hard to learn an instrument. But those were ways that I managed boredom, and it's been wonderful in my life. These kids, they don't have boredom. You know, it's all taken care of, and it's such a problem in terms of what it's taking from them in terms of exposure, I think, in their lives.
Yeah, our collective attention span is shortening. And I was telling this to Bob. I was at the grocery store the other day, and I was getting to the checkout line, and there was somebody in front of me, and they're just kind of finishing up putting their stuff on the conveyor belt and going through. I probably had a minute, maybe, to wait, but I'm sitting there with my shopping cart, and I pull out my phone, right? And I start looking at emails or, you know, open up an app, start scrolling, and I said, gosh, wait a minute. I have like a minute to wait here. Why am I going right to this, right? But these devices have become our answer to boredom. And when we're bored by them and we put them down, a couple minutes later we pick them right back up, right? Because they are our answer to boredom. And I don't know if anybody's had that experience where you're like, gosh, I'm bored of this, put it down, and then without even thinking, you pick it back up and there it is. It's like, wait, I was just bored by this. Why am I going to do the same thing?
There are about 450 million people in the US. Every day, there are 95 million things downloaded onto social media. That's an amazing number, right? So almost a quarter of our population, and multiple people, many people doing multiple downloads every day. But that's the wealth of information that's being refreshed every day in this country alone.
And this last point here, or the second point, emotional management, oftentimes when we're feeling depressed or anxious, we might go to something as an escape, as a distraction. And these things are really convenient distractions. Sometimes they're helpful, sometimes they're avoidant, so we're not really addressing the issue. Instead, we can just kind of delve deeper into these apps and this content.
Well, how much time do we have? I'm looking just at the time. Well, a part of it was, obviously everyone's excited about this, and the government's getting involved, and scientists are getting involved. But what do you do? And that's where we all struggle. What is it that we can actually do? So we really talk about in one of our articles how important it is for families to figure out what the rules are, and for families to set rules. And you have to be creative about it. But if you are able to really figure out as a family what the rules are for using a device in your home or a social media app in your home, how's that going to be carried out? So we really talked about the importance of of experimenting and kind of being open with trying things, and if they're not working, that's okay, but don't give up trying. Change it to something else. So an example would be, I had a rule with my daughters that there was a phase of life where I drove a lot. You know, you have to get them to places, so spent a lot of time in the car. But our family rule was the parents would drive, but you couldn't be on your phone. You had to talk. So I'll drive you, but you have to talk to me. And it actually really worked. So they knew, you know, when they got on the phone, they would say with their friends too, sorry, this is the car, you can't have your phone in. They would have the device off, and they would actually talk to us. We've tried other rules, like if you're having a family dinner, or if you get together as a family at any point during the day, that apps in your phone are not to be used. I was telling Dot, there's research out recently, it says that if you sit down with someone at a table and put a phone on the table, there's a qualitative difference in the content of the discussion you'll have with that person. It is far less intimate if a phone's on the table. And that makes sense to me, right? Because the message is pretty clear that that's a priority and maybe this conversation isn't. So I would recommend talk with as a family, but what times in your family are special that you want to protect? And the device can't be part of that sort of thing. And just last one, I'm always a really big believer in sleep, particularly with adolescents. And there is a need for people to have their device with them all the time. So sleep, even if they're really sleeping, is often with the device next to them on the pillow. So a rule you might want to think about is no one has a device in their room. I likened it to my mother, who, you know, has since passed, but, you know, as she was getting older, she got call waiting. Remember call waiting? It's, you know, click, 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 you know, that kind of thing. So I come from a large family, and we knew she was, you know, alone, so we would call her, and I would call, you know, like every other day, Mom, how you doing, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden you hear this click, click, oh, she'd go, I gotta go. And she'd hang up. So I finally, well, that's very interesting, you know, and tried not to be hurt. And then I eventually said, you know, Mom, I just can't help but notice when I call and the call waiting clicks, you have to go. And she says, of course I do, someone needs me. And I said, well, yeah, but I do, you know. But it's the mystery of what she might have been missing. And that's the dynamic, actually, with these phones. You know, I can't put it down because I might be missing something. They call it FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. It is that kind of dynamic. But it's really important to create space and to create rules. You know, so families need rules and kids need rules. We all live by rules. And if you can actually create rules that aren't ironclad, it can be a discussion, you can change them around. It doesn't mean you have to be that way the rest of your lives. But try to create rules that kids can follow, that you can follow around the use of devices in families.
Yeah, so large family, one of 11.
That's a very large family.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of calls to Mom.
Right. Yeah. So in addition to family rules, we asked parents, we talked a little bit about guilt earlier, but we asked parents to really look and address the guilt first. If you're feeling like you should have done something, or if this is somehow your fault, if social media has gotten out of control and a problem, remember, this was a speeding train. There was nothing that anybody knew how these apps and were going to change over time, just how addictive they were going to become. And by not addressing the guilt, if you do have to make some hard decisions, set some really firm boundaries, that guilt is going to make it really hard for you to see those boundaries and those limitations through. Okay? So really focus on addressing that guilt, and we would just ask, don't feel guilty, right? Easier said than done. And we also ask parents to develop what's called an observing ego. That's a psychological term, but what we're really asking parents to do is to build self-awareness into their own social media use, and a real honesty around it too, right? How can you ask your child to do something different with their social media if yours is problematic itself, right? Not only might it be a little hypocritical, right? You do this, but, you know, I'm not going to look at my own use. but it's going to be really hard for you to give them the skills and the know-how that they need if you haven't done the work yourself, right? So that's really why we ask parents to take a good look in the mirror and actually try it on for size. If it's decreasing the use or eliminating it altogether, do that yourself. You're going to learn a lot of helpful tips through that if you're asking your child to do that, you can then help them through.
You know, the last thing we mentioned is to share what you've learned on social media. And what this really talks about is there's a sea change in how we get information. So, you know, whereas we may have read it in newspapers or magazines, or seen it on some television show we're watching or something, kids today are getting all their information off their device. And that's good. We like that, you know, but be sure to engage with them around that. You know, it's really important to have discussions about what they're learning on social media, because that informs their world. And the risk, Cam talked about it, is the algorithms that actually create a profile that sometimes become quite extreme in orientation. So the more you engage your people, your family, about what people are actually developing interests in and getting their information is very, very important, because that will really create a layer of protection that is helpful.
We'd probably be pretty bad therapists if we didn't say to talk about it with your children, right? Talk about it. Talk what you're learning, what the new thing is, right?
Yeah, so so we certainly work with kids that have struggled with all of these things in a big way. All kids struggle with these things in some way. So it really becomes a question of degree. But I would really just be aware, or work to be aware for all our young people in all our communities about, you know, how they're doing in terms of sleep, connections, anxiety, and depression. You know, I always in my mind think of the kid walking down the street on their phone, kind of like this. That's not a happy kid, you know. That's not someone that's walking around. They're absorbing themselves in something, so they can't pay attention to what's happening out here. But really, you know, we want balance in our lives, and that's actually the kind of the thing we look for with kids. You know, certainly they go through a lot of very strong feelings, but if it's a pervasive sense that depression, anxiety, you know, kind of loss of connection, then it becomes something that, you know, they kind of really need help with. And just, I would encourage you to just be open to that if you see that. And it's hard as a parent to see that in your own children. I certainly know that.
Now, these are some general tips on changing a habit or a practice. We talked about some through our articles, but these are some more. Changing a behavior isn't easy, right? So this goes back to you're likely going to fail, or there's going to be blips along the way. Failure does not equate going right back to square one. Failure just means we need to see what we did, what we learned, and then do something a little bit different, okay? Setting attainable goals. So if you want to reduce your social media to an hour a day, but you're using it for 4 hours a day, it's going to be really hard to just jump to 1 hour and see that through, okay? And maintain that.
And I would just jump in and play with the idea of it being a reward system. You know, when you finish your homework, you can be on social media for an hour or something like that. And kids actually buy into that. We all do. You know, we live in a society where we create rewards for ourselves, but you can use your device, as we do at the hospital, as a reward. It's quite a motivator. And it is a good motivator that way. And it is the containment that is helpful. If it's just open, it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, the one last thought I'd say about goals is really think about what purpose the device is serving. If it's a lack of connection, addressing loneliness or anxiety or depression, things like that, then you might be able to decrease your use for a little bit, but it's slowly going to creep back in. So anything that you give up needs to be replaced with something. And it would be great if whatever it's replaced with also serves the same function, right? That same underlying purpose. All right, and that is it. That's us.
Any questions?
Sort of a silly one, but you know, you talked about how setting an example for your children. You know, I have 2 middle school girls, neither one of them has any access to social media. I'm not on social media. My husband is not, except a little bit for work. He's terrible about looking at his phone all the time. And I'll say to him, Nicholas, you really, you know, should be a better example for kids. And he's like, but I'm grown up and they're kids. So I hear that a lot. You know, and,
Yeah.
you know, how do you, he's very sort of stubborn in that way. He's like, you know, I'm an adult, I can handle it, I can make my own decisions, but that doesn't mean it's,
He needs to look in the mirror.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that is tough. I mean, you just do have to know. Your kids are looking at you all the time. You know, you're on stage and you're being watched, and whatever you're doing is a very strong message. So yeah, I mean, I would encourage you to try to figure out what limits you both feel comfortable with that are reasonable to enforce in your family. But I think the risk is, yeah, it permeates everything. And I feel that, you know, I feel the constant need to check, you know, stay wired in at work, to see what's happening in the world. All those sorts of things are quite a draw. They really are.
What freaks me out is you have a conversation about a certain topic, the next thing you know, it's all over the feed. Like, you know, I'm about to take a trip and I'm getting constant shows that I can go and see and so forth. And I'm like, how do you know?
That's because it's not just a phone, Dot. It's not just a phone. I mean, really, it has the capacity to pick up information and to then direct you with more and more information in that area.
The feed keeps coming through.
Yeah.
It's feeding us, it's feeding our kids, it's giving us all ideas all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
there's no privacy.
My wife is notorious for buying things from the ads that she gets on her social media. And I'm like, you're part of the problem. That's why they're doing this. But it's oftentimes good stuff.
My question's around, I think probably all of us use screen time limits to manage or to lose time on certain apps, and that works. But at some point, right now it's 13, they are able to actually overrule that, right? And they, according to device manufacturers, can do it on their own.
No, it has code.
Sure.
But they
So far, so good, on everything. But I'm anticipating a point in time when my 13-year-old says, I want to manage it. Any tips for how to have that conversation with your kids and, you know, they're teenagers who aren't really rational about this, but having that conversation about reaching some middle ground with them on what's acceptable and kind of acknowledging.
So I think the reality is you're right. For all of these kids, we're going to get to a point where we have to let them do it, you know, and we can put as many protections as we want in, but at some point they have to be able to manage it on their own. That might be when they go to college for the first time or something like that, but it might be when they turn 14. I think I would encourage you to think about what are your expectations, not on social media use necessarily, but in life. You know, whether that's grades, whether that's participating in an activity, you know, getting things done at home, that sort of thing. That's the basis, that's the foundation. If you can manage those things, then you have to be able to manage this well. And if you can't, that's a signal that something is wrong.
Kids are always like 3 steps ahead of us with this stuff,
Yeah.
right? They figure out how to get around the parental controls and cat and mouse. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
No, and it's moving so fast and they're learning so much that they will quickly surpass you. You know, so as you may feel masterful right now, that is a short life. You know, and with the ways they can figure out around it and the many devices they will have access to, you're not going to win. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, when I think about those, the time limits, you're just limiting time. You're not really limiting content unless they don't have access to Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, which are the things that they really want, right? So you can limit how much time they're on it, but really not necessarily the content that they're getting, right? And that's the dangerous piece here. And I think, like Bob said, at a certain point, you know, kids are going to have to do this themselves. Probably not when they get to college, and now they're free to do all of the things, right? But how do you do that in a stepwise or a step-by-step way, where they can get more autonomy, but also have the kind of guardrails of mom and dad?
I do think, I really believe strongly in the collaborative approach with parenting, but I was working with a mother and she was really struggling with it, and I finally said, you do realize you're paying for this device, right? and we do kind of forget that, right? But you are, and I don't know many kids that on their own are earning money to pay for their device. So there is a piece of responsibility that I think that we need to have kids participate in, and there are real costs to these sorts of things. So just something to play with.
You mentioned that the brains still develop until they're 26 years old, and the laws are mostly protecting until they're 18 years old. So maybe there should be laws until they're about 26, or gradual laws. And then also you're talking about casinos. I've worked with building engineers for 10 years, including some of the casinos in Las Vegas. And there's a method to the madness in terms of how they build the physical building and the airflow to draw people into the machines. So I wouldn't be surprised if they use some technology with the computers to draw people into the gambling.
So yes, this is a fascinating area. I was actually with the Department of Mental Health when the Commonwealth was voting on whether we should legalize gambling. And someone was concerned in the legislature that maybe gambling is not such a good thing for people. So they, in their wisdom, commissioned the Department of Mental Health to do a study. So what are the health risks, right? So that ends up in my lap. And I had this wonderful group from UMass that did the research on it. And it was really fascinating that I still remember, if you put a casino here and draw a 5-mile circle around it, there will be a number, and they could tell me the number, of pathological gambling addictions that develop within that radius. If someone lives 10 miles out and they still have the same proclivity to develop pathological gambling, they won't. It was about the proximity. And I thought that was fascinating, right? So we're kind of all carrying around a number of different loadings, so to speak. And it's about what you're exposed to that actually brings it out in you. And I think gambling is an example of that, a great example of that. And that's actually one of the risks here with these devices. I think they impact different kids different ways. And you got to really be aware of that. Sometimes, some kids will just handle it beautifully. Some really do not, and that's the risk. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.